Hi. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Chat with Green Aggies. It's great to see you all today. We've got some Green Aggies online for you. We've got Dr. Becky Grubbs Bowling, Dr. Mung Mung Goo, Chrissy Seegers, our turf specialist in Dallas, joining us today for a few minutes, she says. We're happy to see her. And Dr. Kevin Ong, Dr. Erfan Vafai, and my friend Paul Winsky, who's actually going to kick things off today with a fabulous plant genus of the week, I guess maybe genus and a couple of species. He's going to talk about redbuds, and I am super excited to let him get started.
All right. Well, thank you, Laura. So today, yeah, the plant of the week is a little bit different today, but so we're going to talk about some of the Cercis cultivars that are out there now. And there's been a lot of breeding work going on. There's a lot of new varieties on the market. So I just wanted to make you aware of some of those varieties, and they will fit different niches in the landscape. So just an overview with regard to redbuds. They are a moderate to fast grower when they are young. Their new growth will be pretty quick. This is one of my favorite trees. I really enjoy this tree. Mature height is about 20 to 30 feet. I just like it that spring is knocking on the door because it's one of the early bloomers. It blooms before it puts out the foliage. As you can see in this image here, this is the typical flower color, this purplish pink. There are varieties out there that maybe are a little bit more pink, or some that are even a little bit more darker. It's a great tree because it is quite hardy. You can see from zone 4 down here through zone 9, and I'm in Houston. So it's very versatile. And early on, when it's young, it sort of has more of a vase shape. And as it matures, you can see that rounded habit that it has. And these blooms, there's clusters that just form along the stem. You can see that here in this picture in the lower right-hand corner. So just a refresher of what Cercis canadensis is. Now we're going to take a look at some of the new genetics that's out there. And hopefully you'll go, ooh, ah, and wow. So here's one. This is Ruby Falls. So we've got a weeping habit. So we've got a new habit. We've got dark purple foliage. I like to call this, especially in this picture on the right-hand side, this reminds me of Cousin It. And if you don't remember the Addams Family, then you're too young. So I don't want to hear it. But this is a great plant. It will get around 4 to 6 feet tall. So for small landscapes, you can see how they were able to work this in to this little landscape here. But it's going to get a little bit wider. It's about 6 to 8 feet wide. So it might get twice as wide than it is tall. Light pink flowers when it does bloom in the spring, but that foliage is really what really grabs you. So you have interest in the spring when you have the new flower production, and then you've got this color and interest in the landscape throughout the rest of the season. Now the next one, this is Golden Folds Redbud. So we've got another one that's a weeping, but this one's got even more of a columnar look to it. This one will get a little bit taller, about 8 to 10 feet, but it's not going to get as wide as what Ruby Falls did. And the other thing is this new growth has sort of this light orange color to it. So we've got a nice contrast there with that chartreuse foliage and then these orange tinge with that new growth. Again, great weeping habit, very unique look. So it's a great specimen tree to have in the landscape. Now, with more of the conventional look and the conventional growth habit, this is Silver Cloud. So Silver Cloud is going to get similar to the species, about 20 to 30 feet. It's going to have light pink flowers in the spring, but then we've got this nice pattern green and white variegation, and it's quite a dark green, so it really sets it off kind of nicely. And that new growth has a light pink tinge to it. So from the distance, as you can see in this picture here on the right hand side, it's got an eye-catching appeal to it. It's one of those that will draw you in, trying to figure out what that plant is. But a great habit, great look, and a nice interest in that landscape. Now, the next one is probably one of my favorites, and we had this planted at our trial garden. Um, Back in 2017. We put it in that spring, and then that's when Harvey came through. So the one thing I can say is this plant will not survive 15 to 20 feet of water when it's submerged, because this plant did not make it. But this is the rising sun. And this is one that new growth is like a burnt orange, and then you can see how it, as the leaves mature, that color changes. We're seeing this about 10 to 15 feet tall, so not a very large tree. It has pink lavender flowers when it does bloom in the spring, but just look at that presentation where you can see the darker mature foliage is dark green, and as you work your way towards the tips where the new growth is, you see this burnt orange, this orange yellow chartreuse. And so when that is moving, on a breezy day, you've got that moving, you get quite the color presentation during the course of the day. And the last one I want to talk about is, and I have not seen this one up close yet, but this is one, we complain down here in Houston that we don't get enough fall color. This is one that I want to get a hold of and grow, because I could have fall color pretty much the year round. This is flamethrower. And just look at the colors on that. That is really pretty impressive. It emerges burgundy red, and then it goes to bright yellow, and then it goes to green. So you've got, again, whenever I do landscape classes or classes for master gardeners, I always talk to them about having interest in the landscape year round. And gardening down here on the Gulf Coast, you can do that, but but it doesn't always have to be about the flowers. And the foliage on this one is just quite impressive, the way it looks. Now, I would tend to think in our heat and our conditions, these colors are going to fade a little bit faster, but early spring, when that new growth is coming, it will put on quite the show. I had forest pansy for a while, and I actually enjoyed forest pansy when the new growth came out, because it was a very deep purple, glossy. I enjoyed it more when the new foliage came out, as opposed to the flowers were great, but that new foliage, it just really was great in the spring. So these are some of the newer varieties that are out there, and there's a lot more that are coming. There's a lot of breeding being done, as you can see up here in the cultivar name. You see it NC 2016-2. North Carolina State is doing a lot of breeding in these. Don Shadow in the past out of Tennessee did a lot of breeding in these. So there's still, things in the pipeline, it's a great small tree that could fill a niche, and now we've got some different forms and different foliage colors. So, Laura?
Cool. Thank you, Paul. I asked Paul earlier if he had seen Dr. Denny Werner's IPPS tour of his breeding plots, and Paul didn't get to do that in the fall, but maybe Mung Mung did. Mung Mung, did you get to participate in that virtual tour of Denny Werner's breeding plots?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, of course. How
It was pretty exciting. IPPS, being the International Plant Propagators Society, had a North American summit in October, because none of us could get together and meet. And one cool thing we did get to do was look at a whole bunch of red buds in that North Carolina State breeding program, and he's just got so much going on. And he did give a little shout out to our Texas and Oklahoma. Sometimes they break them out as different species. Sometimes they'll just say it's kind of like a variant of the canadensis. But he has used those extensively in his breeding, and they get more heat tolerance, more kind of a smaller, shinier leaf in the red buds, and so they're really, really pretty cool looking. But lots of great breeding going on.
Yeah, there's a I mean, right now the flamethrower is definitely the hottest. It's definitely the hottest redbud in the market. And we have a question. Are these deciduous like the Texas redbud? So
Yes.
all these are deciduous. Yeah, all these are deciduous. Most of these cultivars that Paul mentioned, they don't have the flossy leaf like like the Cercis canadensis variety Oklahoma subspecies Texans. So that's the one, that local one, have a really smaller and glossy leaves. These have kind of like papery leaves. So I think there's a slight, just a little difference there, not too much, but yes, they are definitely deciduous. But then it really depends, right? If we have a mild winter, and and depending on how mild our winter is going to be, yeah. So
Well, they're deciduous.
yeah, yes.
But
yes.
that leaf variation is a nice little segue into what I'm going to talk about, which is like kind of how trees survive. And I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint here and share it. I hope you are seeing that. And I will, let's see if I can, oops, I cannot click it. There it goes. Okay. All right. All right. So we love to talk about triangles. This is for Dr. Ong. This is, of course, the plant disease triangle, where you've got lots of different factors that have to come together for disease to occur. You got to have your host, you got to have your pathogen, you got to have the environment for the disease. And then here's another very famous triangle in plant science, the soil triangle, where you have all the different textural components of soil, and they come together and make loam soils right in the middle, and different soils out on the ends. But triangles are a good way to kind of illustrate that there are some different features, and there's probably a place where they come together and something happens, or maybe you're out on one or the other feature. So the triangle I'm going to talk about today was kind of new to me. It's called Grime's triangle, and Philip Grime was a plant ecologist, so he was studying natural plant populations. So I'm going to kind of try to apply this a little bit to the landscape, and I'm going to talk about trees, whereas he was talking about all kinds of plants in a natural system. But he basically came up with there were 3 different ways that plants kind of tried to survive. And those 3 ways are by being a good competitor. And when you think about a competitor, it just kind of outraces the other plants in the environment. So for a tree, that could be growing taller and getting the sunlight. For say like a ground cover, like we talked about a few weeks ago, that could just be literally spreading out quickly. So a competitor usually can grow and get big. And then ruderal plants are the ones that produce lots of offspring. So they get sexually mature quickly, they start setting lots of seeds, and they just basically try to, cover the ground with their children. That would be in trees. I think our sugarberry, are often called the hackberry, is a really good example of that. It produces tons of berries, and those berries are actually spread all over the ground, and then it puts out lots of trees. And then there's the stress tolerator, and that's, I think, the thing we really want to talk about in the landscape is being able to withstand some kind of environmental stress, and which trees can do that. So carrying on, here's a quote from Mr. Grime, Dr. Grime. In addition to disturbance, plant populations tend to experience consistent selective pressures from physiological stress, like water, nutrient, and light availability. So this was sort of a departure from just thinking about disturbance, which was the way that plant ecologists usually talked about plants. They would say, you know, these are the pioneer plants that can go into a disturbed area, lots of things that we think of as like weeds. And then these are the successions. So, you know, you've got to get to this older growth, but he kind of had a different way of looking at it. And I think it's a useful way to look at it. All right, so here's the model again. You've got the 3 points in the triangle, and remember that all plants are going to be some combination of these 3. So we're going to actually look at one plant and talk about how it does all of these things, but all plants are some combination. Some of them are more on one side or the other. I made it a little bit shorter and sweeter. I sort of thought of it in this way, instead of, especially that word ruderal, which is not something that I commonly, you know, bring up in everyday conversation. I thought you could call it the SSS model. So you've got spreaders, you've got seeders, and you've got sleepers. Because a lot of times stress resistance is some way about dormancy, really. So who wins when everything is great? You know, when there's not a whole lot of stress in the system and there's not a whole lot of disturbance, which of the points of the triangle is going to be favored? Anybody want to say what they think? When you've got water, you've got sunlight. Nobody wants to talk today, so.
When you got water, you got sunlight.
Everything's great. What's going to be favored? A competitor, a ruderal species, or a species that tolerates stress well?
Competitor, I think.
I think you are right.
Yay!
That is absolutely correct. Thank you. So if you look at this, this is the state champion, the national champion pecan tree near Weatherford. So it's probably the world champion, since we're kind of in the best part of the native range of pecans. But what's its competitive advantage here? What do you think? See the little people down here? You'll see the little people. Teeny tiny little picnic table.
It shades everyone else.
Yeah, exactly. It's big, right? It's a giant tree. It's taller than the other trees around it, so it gets the light. It shades everything else out. It also has, you know, a big root system, right? So it's getting the water, it's getting the nutrients, it's getting the sunlight, and it's just able to do that because it's really, really big. All right, so things are changing here. Something happens to disturb the environment, and in the landscape, that's often construction. You know, there's some kind of construction. Those old big trees are disturbed, or maybe they, you know, finally died or blew over in a storm. Who wins in this particular situation?
Spreader.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The ruderal cedar spreader ability is favored, because that's when seeds come up. That's almost, so many of our weeds are in this category. And you think about, okay, there's a disturbance. What's the first thing that's going to come up? Well, you know, probably some kind of thing you don't want. Not always, but very often it's going to be something you don't want. So, you know, this tree also is in some ways ruderal, if you think about it. So what does a pecan tree produce?
Pecans, seeds.
Pecans, seeds. And it's pretty good at spreading them out, right? Because, you know, I mean, I don't know if you have squirrels, but I think squirrels are really efficiently planting pecan trees in every single container plant that I have. They plant them, you know, all over my landscape. They also fall all over my landscape. You know, I've got a pecan tree and I've got about a bajillion pecan seedlings every year to deal with. So it also has like a ruderal advantage, because it does produce a seed that other animals want and move around too, which, you know, with like the hackberry, obviously birds are the primary movement of that seed. But these are, you know, another advantage, another way that a tree can survive. Not so good for us in the landscape though, because as I said, those little bitty pecan trees are weeds to me. So how about when resources are limited? There's no necessarily disturbance is not a factor, but stress is up in some way. What do you think, Mung Mung?
Of course, the last one, because you only have three categories.
Obviously, and the last one's called stress tolerance, right? And that's actually the one I'm going to talk about some more, but we'll talk about it with this pecan tree. What sort of stress tolerance mechanisms does a pecan have?
It's a tree, so it has a lot of reserve in its in its trunk and stuff. So that's its a stress tolerance mechanism.
Super deep taproot that takes 7 years to really develop.
Yes, Becky Bowling. A pecan has a actually unique root system for a tree, that giant taproot system. And there's one more thing that a lot of trees, and we even talked about this with the redbuds, that deciduousness.
Oh, the deciduousness that yeah.
That's a stress tolerance mechanism. So
it is.
It can tolerate cold weather,
Well, not only cold weather, it just kind of like hibernates a little bit during the winter time. Yeah. And be cool with it.
Yeah. And it doesn't, it's set up to do that really well. And sometimes, trees will lose leaves in the summertime when it's really, really hot and dry, because they're set up to do that. It's a way that they can tolerate stress. So, all right. So in the managed landscape, we obviously don't want a bunch of stuff that seeds out, because that's not really beneficial to us as landscape managers. And, competitors we might want sometimes. Sometimes we do want a tree that just grows big and gets big and shades and, lives a long time. I mean, that's desirable, I would say, in trees in general. But mostly what we're looking for really when we're selecting for good landscape plants is for stress tolerance. So, little flashback to October when we talked about the chinkapin oak. I want you to think about this one a little bit as we talk about some of those stress tolerant mechanisms, because I said that this was, a great tree for the heat and that it could handle the drought. And I showed you one in a natural landscape and I showed you one in a managed landscape, and they both look pretty great, so let's be thinking as we talk through this a little bit more about why that is. All right, so drought adaptations. Stress adaptations, what are we going to talk about? Well, extensive root systems are one. And when I think about a tree with an extensive root system, I think about a mesquite tree. You can find mesquite roots if you're trying to get rid of mesquites in a pasture, some kind of situation where you're trying to get rid of them. You can find mesquite roots 20 feet away from the mesquite tree that you've just cut down. You'll find its roots. So they have roots that have been measured up to 50 feet away from the tree, which is one thing that makes them really, really tough. They also have that ability to wait in the spring until, that's not what this slide is about, but until it's usually past our last freeze date. They're pretty hard to fool. They don't usually come out before that happens. And just for Becky, if you look carefully there, you can see my little donkey Hazel in that picture under the mesquite tree. All right. The next one, the sycamore, this is down the street from my house in town. This was a picture in August. Sycamores are not supposed to start losing their leaves in August, but it was hot and it was dry, as it often is, and they've got big leaves. So they just, start shedding some leaves, and that helps them make it through the rest of the hot, dry period without all those leaves to support. So it's an adaptation for drought. Okay, a couple more things having to do with the leaves. Waxy leaves. Almost all the hollies have really waxy leaves. They've got protective coating on the leaves that limits their moisture loss to the air. There's lots of other plants that do that. In fact, the one that I used for an example of a pubescent leaf, magnolia, has a waxy leaf on top and pubescence underneath. And those hairs, the reason that's hairy drought mechanism works is because if you think about it, those hairs, like hairs on your arm or whatever, really hold moisture. And so Mung Mung, I don't know, I often tell this story that you told me one time about this grad student in Arkansas. Do you remember telling me that story?
What grad student in Arkansas?
It was just a grad student in Arkansas that you knew and worked with, and he was just a really, really hairy person. You remember telling me this?
Yes. It's actually not a grad student in Arkansas, but anyway.
I'm sorry, I've been telling it wrong. It was what was it? A professor in Mississippi? I don't know. I mean,
yes. It was a friend. It was a friend in Mississippi. But well, why don't you tell your version of the story?
And you can tell me if it's completely wrong. So Mung Mung, being from China, was used to people with not so much body hair. And then she had this friend or acquaintance who had the hair like growing out the top of his shirt and out the ends of his sleeves and just, big old head of hair and a beard. And she just, asked him like, how many towels does it take you to dry off when you take a shower? And he said 3. But if you think about it, if you have a lot of hair, it takes more towels to dry off after you take a shower. Did I get that story right? Except for the Arkansas and Mississippi. I'll correct my version of the story. But anyway, those hairs just hold moisture. So if a leaf has a lot of hairs, that's a drought adaptation. It's going to hold moisture close to it. And in case you're wondering who that is, that's Gerald Foray, a nurseryman in Louisiana, standing next to some really nice magnolias.
Just to be clear, the hairy one is not the nurseryman standing in front of the magnolias.
What? No, he is not especially hairy, Gerald. No.
So we're not
talking about that. Mm-mm.
Okay, good.
No.
We're not naming names.
No, not naming names. Okay, couple more drought adaptations that really function well in trees. So small leaves as cedar elms. A cedar elm is what I call very adjustable. It's got that less leaf surface to transpire, and it can also drop a few leaves, no big deal. You think about it, if your leaf is as big as my hand, like a sycamore, and you drop one of those, that kind of hurts your photosynthesis, that hurts your sugar production. But, how many cedar elm leaves could you fit on my hand? I don't know, maybe 30, 40. And you drop a few and you can just adjust really easily. So those small leaves make for good adjustments for transpiration, minimization. And then finally, we've got a plant that probably everybody can recognize as something that grows in the desert and can cause problems in the desert because it grows better than other desert plants. But salt cedar has these sunken stomata, and you can see in the picture those stomata are down inside the tissue. So once again, kind of like the hairy leaves, that moisture is held down inside the stomata, so it doesn't have to, it doesn't lose as much moisture while it's transpiring. So it may even reabsorb some of that moisture.
Hey, Laura, so can you just quickly describe what stomata is?
Oh, the stomata here, this is the picture of the stomata you can see. Those are the structures on a leaf that exchange gas. So they release water vapor, oxygen, they take in carbon dioxide, and they're a really important part of the photosynthetic process. So plants have to transpire. They have to have stomata, they have to transpire. But some of them have adjusted the structure of the stomata to make that transpiration use less water.
Thank you, Laura.
You're welcome. And little known fact, mistletoe have a lot of stomata, so they actually transpire more typically than the tree that they're on. So you think about, we always see cedar elms with mistletoe on them a lot of times. The mistletoe is really sucking the water from the cedar elm because it's transpiring a whole lot more than the plant. All right, so back to our plant of the week from October, this old chinkapin oak. What do you think? What are its mechanisms? Where would you put it on that triangle?
It spreads. It also shed their leaves at severe drought stress. and very deep root system.
Yep, all of those things. So it's got some of those competitor features, which are great in a shade tree, and also some of those drought adaptations, which are great in a shade tree that you want to stay alive during a drought. So that's really my whole little point there. I just kind of like thinking about things in this way. It sort of helps me make sense of how some plants are more able to withstand difficult situations than others. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Dr. Goo's going to start sharing and talk a little bit about pruning trees.
Do you all see my first slide?
I do, yes, looks great.
And the butcher?
Yep.
Okay. It's interesting that you know, when I started to put the presentation together, then I realized, hold on, let me I think I need to share my sorry, new computer issue. Where's my button at? This is oh, all right, can y'all see me?
I can see you. I was going to ask you if you were trying to share your video, but now you're okay. Perfect.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. We actually have we have a lot of quote unquote butchers in our neighborhoods, and going back when I try to put this together, I feel like, oh, maybe 20 minutes is not enough for a tree pruning presentation. But in the future series of chat with the Green Aggies, we will be adding more and more pruning stuff, pruning topics, presentations in the arboriculture. Our first week of the month is always the arboriculture themed, so we could probably add more there. And definitely when you fill out the survey, let us know what specific topics that you would like to hear more or more in depth on. So the butchers, lots of butchers in our neighborhood, and also in the public landscapes and stuff, and not only on crepe myrtles. So really the reasons for tree pruning, and sometimes this also applies to shrubs. Remove the dead woods, remove diseased woods or insect infested woods, eliminate the structural problems like crossing branches, tight crotches in trees, eliminate hazards like pedestrian conflicts, reduce the plant size, and also the aesthetics. So these are some of the reasons for pruning or for tree pruning. So this is the reason. This is one of the reasons. And if you look at the this tight V, this tight V crotches in trees, this happens actually quite often to trees, especially those with opposite, especially those with opposite with the opposite arrangement, leaf arrangement, that sometimes you'll see this type of V crotches in trees. And then this specific one, this is back crossing limbs, and as you can see, this one, it's instead of going out and about, it's going back towards the center of the tree, and very likely, just like this one, it may rub in, the branches may rub in with the others when it goes back, to the, to the center and back crossing it. So this is a rubbing branch, and as you can see here, that it's also will create future problems. So this is really creates a natural opening. Think about it, it creates a natural opening for disease in insects. It's a natural entry for these things. And for this one, it's kind of like a safety, in terms of vehicles. And if you think about that, this vehicle come in and go, some others, and this is an SUV. There may be even trucks that's taller than this. If just think about the damage that it may do to these branches and stuff. So these are just a potential, just creating potential natural openings for this branch wounds, these damage, mechanical damage on those, just a natural entry point for disease or insects. Oh, sorry, don't know what happened. Okay, so this is a co-dominate leader, and it happens in opposite leaved trees like maples or ash. And if that center branch, that's the original leader, the original central leader may have died due to some reasons, or a freeze damage or something, and then these two, they come, these two, the top bud, after the death of the original leader, they just become co-dominant leaders. If it's opposite arranged leaf trees, you may not see this type of thing, because there's only a top one. In these opposite leaf trees, there are top two, and both try to be the leader, and often you end up with these co-dominant leaders. And sometimes what we see in the V crotch, and this often would form a very just a natural V crotch up on the top. And this is such as the co-dominant stems and all for the trees with very tight crotches, failed to pruning off some of those tight branches. It may create, when the trees grown older and older, it will have these poor structure. And think about this area. This area is a very weak point in terms of the tree structure. And in a big windstorm or snowstorm, this this often happens in the tree branches, in the branch failure. And this, when do we have the snow? Was it around the New Year time? Was it around the New Year time that we had the snow? We had a pretty good amount of snow. We really had a pretty good amount of snow here in College Station. And after that snow event, and you just wouldn't believe how many of our neighbors are, just pulling out their failing branches. There are a lot of good trees, and a lot of these are wax myrtles in this case, and there are some of the Bradford pears too. It's just really that codominant and also the close V crotch structures making these trees are a very potential, a good candidate for this kind of storm or snow, a heavy snow load damage.
You know, Mung up here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we often have ice storms, not even snowstorms, which are really heavy on tree limbs sometimes, that weight of that ice. And then we have tornadoes from time to time, which also are pretty stressful for trees. But I think my friend Sam Hill of Sam Hill Tree Care said really nicely that, you know, there's not too many things that can kill a large mature tree, but failure from a storm because it has poor structure is one of the things that can kill a large healthy tree. And that's a really, you know, worth avoiding. That is definitely worth working on. So
I definitely agree with that statement. If you think about it, you know, often we see certain diseases and insects, and these trees are pretty resilient. I have seen some trees that completely defoliated by certain larvae, just eating the trees, all the trees alive, defoliating the trees, and the tree oftentimes will still just come back on. Then of course, weakened a little bit, but really, kind of nothing does damage like this. When the insect damage or disease damage, at least the plant has certain time, has some time to build up defense. They do have the defense mechanism. Whether that being, shedding all their leaves, just go, because, for insects, they need to find food. Once the food is gone, they're gone. So, the trees, the plants do have certain mechanism to cope with those kind of damage. And of course, I'm not saying that they will, naturally cope with all insect or disease damages. For instance, there are quite a few tree diseases like Dutch elm disease, those kind of things that it will eventually kill the tree. But for this kind of sudden damage, the structural damage from these, whether strong wind or heavy snow load or ice load, these are sudden damages that the plants simply don't have. The plants simply don't have time to defend themselves with, and these poor structures kind of setting them up for failure. If we don't take care of these poor structures early on, I guess it doesn't necessarily have to be early on, but definitely before these disastrous weather events. This is often what you see. Okay, so this is a problem with the codominant leader, and you have this buildup of non-structural bark between the stems, and sometimes this buildup of non-structural bark between the stems could be from the same plant, the two codominant leaders, and then sometimes when it could be from two different trees, when they were seedlings, it was nothing, but with the plants grow thicker and thicker, and they're just, they start to form, it's a form of these non-structural barks between the two plants. And if one plant is not taken out, and you'll see this buildup of this bark, and they're just, it's constantly fighting. This basically what you see here is a constant fighting, and there's no here, because of the buildup of this bark, there's nothing to hold them together. It's their natural instinct to push each other away. So eventually, one will win, especially with the little help, of the wind or snow or ice in this case. Pruning trees. So the time of the year to prune trees, in general, just before rapid growth in early spring, when the trees are dormant. Even for evergreen trees, they still have that semi, they're not completely dormant, but they still have that semi-dormant time, that semi-dormant period of time, and that will be a good time to prune them. Think about it. Just think about it. For someone is kind of sound sleeping or at least halfway sleeping, you give them a shot. It doesn't hurt that much, versus a fully awake person. You give that person a shot, that's gonna hurt a little bit more. But anyway, that's just an analogy. So it's, and then during the dormant time, especially for the deciduous trees, that it's easier to see the structures. There's less weight without leaves, and even for the evergreen trees, it's also true. It has less weight with less leaves, and pass the season with the ice or snow damage. And then for diseased, insect infested, dead woods, probably anytime, anytime is a good time. For dead woods, it's definitely anytime is a good time. Three type of pruning techniques. Only one is correct. Laura, do you know which is the one that's correct?
I would say that you could do some crown thinning if you wanted to, but I wouldn't top or head back. That's bad. And pollarding, I mean, in some places they do practice it with success, but it's pretty hard to do well. So there you go.
I agree with you. It's unless that's a very, very specific effect that you want to achieve. Like for instance, you planted a bunch of trees like really close, and then you want to build a windbreak, a strong windbreak, and that you may do the pollarding, and then so force the trees to grow side branches, that way. But
like cutting it to the same place every year, like
right.
Yeah, so it forms kind of like a callus ball. It doesn't look good to me, but it does like form this like consistently sized.
Right, it's not natural. It's not natural.
No.
So this is what crown thinning is. There could be, and here's the thing, this it depends on whether you want the central leader or not. But basically, you're thinning. So so the key here, the thinning is you're doing this selectively. You're doing this selectively. Purposely taking out some branches to thin it out. And this is cutting it back to the to the main trunk of the tree. And this is what topping looks like. We of course we're pretty familiar with the topping of crepe myrtles, but people are not only doing this to crepe myrtles. Last week, Laura mentioned that they're doing this to lilac. No, not lilac. What's the Texas lilac?
Vitex.
The Texas lilac. they're doing these to sycamore trees. You know, I've seen a lot of the topping done on sycamore trees. Sycamore trees just kind of like crepe myrtles, very strong growth potential. It seems like, you know, just comes up anywhere you cut it. And this is an example of Palardin cutting it back to the same areas. So, I mean, if you ask me, this is really not a beautiful looking thing, you know, if you compare it to the natural branching tree back there. So how to recognize where to prune? Where do you prune this thing? The tree itself actually has very good indicator, you know, telling us where we could prune. So this is the main trunk, and this is the branch. Let's just pretend that this branch is actually, you know, extending a you know, pretty long there. So there's a transition region between the trunk and the branch called the branch collar, and then the ideal cut, you know, the ideal pruning cut is just slightly beyond this branch collar, just right here. So if you think about the tree, if you think about it as, you know, if you look at it as a plumbing system, this transition area, it's where the natural valve, you know, this is the trunk, this is the branches, they kind of have a natural valve here in the tree's plumbing system. And then, you know, you definitely, you don't want to cut it over here. You just want to cut it slightly outside of this natural valve system. No, sorry. So that's the transition system. So if we look at this picture, here, you know, this is it does give you a pretty good indication of the branch collar. And this will, you know, would be where you will make a pruning cut just right outside of this branch collar. So where is this one? Laura, what do you think? Where would you cut this one?
I would, you can't see my cursor, but I can like really nicely run that little line.
Okay, all right. You don't have to
get past, you want to get past that little bit of bark here, that's that branch bark collar, and then you want to come out here. So.
What do you think about this? So this is the branch bark ridge. This is, yeah. And then this is where the you know, you see the bark, and, you know, giving you a pretty good indication there. You go slightly outside of this and making this pruning cut.
Right, and that cut will also give you that smaller area for the branch to close over with that callus.
Right, right.
Smaller diameter.
Yeah.
Which is perfect.
So this is where you would make the cut. I think there are still a lot of things. This is the end of my presentation on tree pruning. I think there are still a lot of things that we should we could cover, but I'll probably leave it to next time. So